Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, what an eerie sight this is out here. Here I am all alone on this deserted road, and I'm out hunting for UFOs. I remember back in Warminster, England, I actually signaled with one, similar to this object actually in the sky. I had a big torchlight, a big searchlight in my hand, and I blinked it on and off and on and off and on and off. I hear the crickets and the whooping of the frogs and the owls, and let me try blinking at this UFO. Blink, blink. Oh, look at it. It seems to be responding. There's a UFO in the sky. There's a starman. Maybe he's come to take me away. I hope he's friendly, because I know our guests are tonight. And so is our co-host, Tim Swartz, out there in Jasper, Indiana. Oh, no, here comes the mothership right behind the scout craft. Boy, I better get back into the car and try to get out of here. I don't trust all of these aliens.
Tim, if they take you away, give me your car keys. You're my ride out of here.
Uh-oh. Well, I don't know. Did it look like it was aiming at you or at me?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, they can take you now.
Oh, good. Is that the car keys? Well, there you go. Okay, and you'll probably want to take over control of the show as well.
Oh, nobody can take over this show like you do, Tim.
Oh, bless your heart. There'll be something in your Christmas bonus this year.
Yeah. Oh, more coal in my stockings.
Hey, speaking of bonus, if anybody's got a good office chair, I need a donation. This thing rattles and rolls like you wouldn't believe, and it's so uncomfortable to be seated on for 2 hours, even with 3 pillows on it. So just send it in a cardboard box. Email me or give me on Facebook, and I'll give you my address and send it over. No more recliners, though. I don't have any room for them. So Tim, enough of this chatter here. I know we're getting ready for Thanksgiving. Have you got the turkey out on the lawn?
Yes, that's right. We've got our free range turkeys that I'm going to send Melissa out with the hatchet to pick one and take it out, because I just don't have the heart for it.
Well, yeah, one of the famous coffee shops, well, I guess I could mention it, Dunkin' Donuts has an ice cream turkey for Thanksgiving, but you can only order it online. Now, I'm not saying that you should, or I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I just think it's very bizarre. I mean, I look at the photo in the Dunkin' Donuts, and I can't tell whether it's ice cream covered with chocolate or it's a real turkey covered with chocolate. Yeah. But I'm going to ask one of our brave listeners to find out for us and check in with us and let us know. Anyway, Tim, tell us about who we have on tonight, because I'm raring to go, and I'm very excited about this show because by way of synchronicity, I know one of the guests tonight.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we have, as usual, we have 2 fantastic guests tonight. We have William Kent Center. Now, William, or is it Kent? Do you
I go by Kent.
Okay.
Yeah, go by Kent. Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. Well, Kent was born in 1953 in Durham, North Carolina, and after having several UFO experiences at a fairly young age, he really kind of became disenchanted by the ridicule that he got when he tried to tell others about it. And I tell you, Kent, I have had so many witnesses tell me the very same thing. So I can see where that really got you started in all this. So in the mid-1980s, Kent felt that he had to do more than just research, and that's when he searched out George Fawcett, another well-known researcher in North Carolina, and the two started the North Carolina State Chapter for MUFON. And in 2013, Center started the Center for UFO Research North Carolina and hosted their first conference in June of that year, and then they had another last October in 2016. So also joining us tonight is Kent's daughter, Lindsay Center. Now, Lindsay is the daughter, as we said, of William Center. And, the UFO mystery has always played a major role throughout her life. She says that, at times that she has become disheartened about the prejudice that surrounds the UFO mystery. And she states that she's often reluctant to bring up the subject, even around friends, because of the dismissive attitudes and jokes that people always tend to make when you want to talk about UFOs. What are people, what have they been drinking? What kind of drugs have been taking? And, she finds that frustrating. And when asked what she was most interested in about UFOs and other paranormal phenomena, she answered all of it. Now, Lindsay is also the owner of Center Stage Events in North Carolina. Center Stage Events represent some of the best in the field when it comes to all things weird, magical, and paranormal, with a wide range of talent, perfect for all event and entertainment needs. So, Kent, Lindsay, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
What do you know?
Sure thing.
I have a synchronicity. Tim, don't I always have a synchronicity?
You do.
It seems.
Just pull another one out of your bag.
Well, this one is actually written up as well in the Matrix Control System of Philip K. Dick and the Paranormal Synchronicities of Tim Beckley. And it involves a mutual friend of Kent's and mine, the late George Fawcett. George Fawcett was a UFO investigator who was really a true pioneer in the field. And we talk about me being a pioneer and all. He went back before my time even. And when I was a teenager, I used to drive up to his home in Easton, Pennsylvania. He had a fabulous UFO photo collection, and he was running the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and I know I've got this wrong, Pennsylvania, New Jersey UFO Research Group, and was very active. George always worked most of his life, if not all of his life, full-time for the YMCA. That was his a daytime job, and in the evening he collected UFO material and case studies. He was a UFO researcher like no other. In fact, I just recently published a book. We just published a book called Inside the Saucers, which is a reprint of the first book I ever did in 1964 at the age of about 15. And I see that there's a chapter in there by George Fawcett on 15 years of UFO research. Now it would be 70 years of UFO research if he were still alive, and he would still be recording all the activities. So George and I had a pretty good relationship, and we corresponded for many years. Now. Back, I guess, in the 1990s, I couldn't give you the exact year, I decided to attend the MUFON convention in Denver, Colorado. I'm not a member of MUFON, but I thought it would be a good place to lug a lot of my books out and try to present them to MUFON members who might not know of our publishing activities. So I took like 12 boxes of books, not personally, but I shipped them out ahead of time. And there was a stopover in St. Louis before boarding another plane to go on to Denver. So, of course, it's usually about an hour or an hour and a half delayed to the next flight, till you get on the next plane. And so what do? You usually roam around and you end up in the bar or the luncheonette area, the dining area. And lo and behold, I walk into the dining area, and there's a gentleman that I think I recognize. And lo and behold, it is George Fawcett. Well, now, I have not seen George Fawcett in many a moon. I mean, several decades. I can't remember the last time that I saw him. And our correspondence had been limited in recent years. But of course, I was very happy to see him because, like I say, he was an old chum going back to the 1960s. So I go over and say, "George, how are you?" Well, what a coincidence! What a word, right? What a coincidence it is that we're meeting here on the way to the MUFON convention. And he looks at me and he says, "MUFON convention?" And I said, "Yes, aren't you going to Denver for the MUFON convention?" And he says, "No, I'm going to Roswell to talk about them taking over my UFO library when I pass away." And I said, "Well, that's really strange. I mean, what's the chance? I'm in New York and he's in North Carolina. What's the chances of meeting in a luncheonette without any being preordained or planned in advance?" So we had a little chuckle over it and shook his hand and got back on the plane. But there's another synchronicity, meeting George Fawcett in the airport in St. Louis, even though we are going our separate ways.
Yeah, he did donated all of his information to there. His goal was to start basically a UFO museum here in North Carolina, but that didn't come to fruition. So he donated all his items there to the museum there in Roswell.
Well, can I? I know you as a friend on Facebook. I don't know too much about your activities, and that's why you're on tonight. And also, I was impressed also by the fact that you were associated with George Fawcett, because he was an outstanding researcher. He didn't take no nonsense, and he didn't print no BS, and he was very much into this for many years. I mean, how many people do you know?
Oh gosh, I was with him for 20 years. That I was with him. We started back in, like I said, in the I guess it was around 1988. When I had enough.
Had he bought his UFO set up his UFO organization down there? Is that how you met him?
Well, no. What he did, I after I had my sighting in Durham in the mid '80s, that's when I just said I've got to find out what the heck is going on, because I've had some. It started when I was young. I had a sighting, and when I grew up right outside of D.C. Actually, my father was with the federal government, so we moved up to Washington, D.C. I lived in Falls Church, and I had a sighting there when I was 9, and then when I was later around 14. But the people around the area where you lived, everybody in D.C. was either with the government or the military or whatever. But I had this sighting in Falls Church, and the gentleman, my dad's friend that lived behind us, later on I find out he was with the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was stationed out in Roswell. He was stationed at Wright-Patterson. And this guy was the head of their the photo reconnaissance lab out of the Pentagon for DIA. And Colonel Blanchard was his commander just about everywhere he went. And this guy, and then my best friend's father was deputy director of Federal Aviation Agency. He used to fly in the Air Force, flew in the Army Air Corps under Curtis LeMay. But when I had this sighting when I was 9, I asked my best friend's father, the FAA guy, if flying saucers are real.
Well, just regress a little. What exactly did you see at age 9?
Well, I saw these two. Basically, I had an upstairs bedroom I shared with my brother, and my whole bedroom just lit up, just like solid white, and it was so bright coming from outside the window. And I got up to look out the window, and there was just these two glowing, just like balls of light, but they were big, like they covered half my backyard up in the air. They were just humongous. And I kept trying to wake my brother up, and he wouldn't wake up. So I ran downstairs looking out our patio door and just watched these two big white objects. And after that, I don't remember how I got back into bed or anything. I just ended back up in my bed, waking up the next morning. And then I got up and was pretty upset with my brother that he wouldn't wake up. And I just remember not knowing what these things were. And so that led me to ask the question to my best friend's father if flying saucers are real. And, I was 9 years old at the time. And back then, yeah, I'm sure with Kennedy as the president, and you're living in D.C., everybody's so patriotic. And, the military is on your side, does everything, is going to protect you, the whole deal. And I remember asking him if flying saucers are real, and he just had this shocked look on his face. And he turned to me and he thought for a minute. He didn't answer me right away. And then he said, I had a guy that was in our outfit that walked into a hangar where one had crashed, and they had it in this hangar, and he wasn't supposed to see it. And he goes, you know what they did to him? And I went, what? And he said, they locked him up in the mental hospital. And I said, why'd they do that? And he said, because when he gets out and talks, nobody's going to believe him. And then he just turned back. He was cooking steaks on the grill outside. And then he just looked away. And, it basically right then scared the heck out of me. I had such a fear, like, oh my gosh, because I was getting ready to tell him what I saw. And then all of a sudden I felt like, man, if I open my mouth, they're going to lock me up. At 9 years old, it just really stuck with me. It really kind of terrified me. I'm like, then I couldn't believe it. Why would the government do that? Why would the Air Force do that to somebody? And it really stuck with me. And so I never told anyone, what I saw as far as growing up. And then had another similar encounter when I was 14. We had a screen porch in our backyard attached to the house. And, D.C. is a muggy, humid place in the summertime. D.C. is actually built on a swamp, but so humid in the summer. So I would go outside and I would sleep on the screen porch. And I woke up and saw like a cone-shaped light coming down to the ground. And it was a covered screen porch, so I couldn't see where it was coming from. I just was looking out the screen. It was coming down to the ground. And then all of a sudden, this light stops like 2 or 3 feet off the ground. And I thought that was so strange. And I walked outside the screen porch, and the light was coming from it was like a bright orange disc-shaped object. And I just, no sound. It was just dead silence. And then this thing, the light went back up into it, and then it just started floating away over the trees. And I just remember running down the street trying to see it. But by the time I got to the end of the street, where there's a clear opening, it was gone. And so those two things occurred, at an early age of 9 and like 14 years old. And then what happened?
Kent, was that the experience that you later tried to tell your dad about by trying to show him a UFO magazine?
Yeah, well, what happened was I have, these sightings in my memory, and there was this look issue, Flying Saucers, did a special issue on flying saucers, and I begged my mom to get this for me, and she bought me the magazine. And when I ran out in the screen porch, my dad and 2 gentlemen, one was the guy with the Air Force, DIA, he sat in the corner. He was, the whole neighborhood was scared of this guy because he was really stern with his kids. You didn't even want to look at him. He was just one of those that kind of scared you as a kid. And another neighbor was out there, and the 3 of them were out in the screen porch. And I just ran out so excited about this because I wanted my dad to see it, because it was here. There's a picture of a flying disc on the cover of the whole thing. I just wanted him to see how real these things were, And naturally, he started scoffing, started ridiculing me, and they were sitting there laughing. And I didn't even want to look over I'll tell you, his name was Jack, is what I'll tell, because I don't want to tell his last name yet. But so I didn't even want to look at Jack. And when I did, I was shocked because I thought he would be, joking at me the most. And he was sitting in a chair and he had his head bent over, looking down, like looking at the ground, and he had clenched his fist. And he was just gripping his fist and shaking his head like no, looking at the ground as they were making fun of me. And I didn't understand. It kind of threw me off. I figured he'd be laughing and everything. It wasn't until later I found out what his history was and what his job was and what he did. But that occurred, after my sighting when I was 14. And that kind of stood out, in my mind. But it wasn't until the mid-'80s, I was working 2 full-time jobs. I ran a assembly line for Northern Telecom at Research Triangle Park, and I was a front office manager at a Holiday Inn hotel. And I worked midnight to 7 in the morning shift at Northern Telecom. I got off at 11 o'clock at night at the hotel. So I had an hour in between to get home, grab something to eat, and get to my second job. And when I arrived at my house, it was about 11:10. 10 after 11 at night. I drove up in my driveway. I got out of the car, and there was this craft just sitting up in the air, probably no more than 400 feet high, about a quarter of a mile away. And it just sat there, had these 3 big bright, I've never seen lights like this. They didn't glow, but they were very bright. It was just a few painted circles, perfect circles in the sky. And they looked like they were recessed.
Too bad you didn't have a camera with you.
Oh, I was just, even the whole time this was going on, I'm thinking, God, why didn't I have a camera? But I got my wife out of the house. I was yelling and yelling, trying to get her out, and because I didn't want to move.
Yes.
And I finally got her out to come look at it. But after she looked at it for a minute or so, she just took off and ran back in the house. And I got a flashlight out of my car and started flashing at this thing. Did like 3 long,
just like I did in the introduction, because I got a response. Did you?
Yeah. What happened was I had 3 long flashes and 3 short. I kept doing this, and then all of a sudden, as I'm watching it, it's as if you hit a light switch and it went pitch black, and the lights go out. And that lasted about 2 minutes, and I just leaned back against my car, threw the flashlight back in the car, and I'm leaning against, just thinking, why didn't I have a camera? Man, please come back, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just thinking this stuff in my mind. And all of a sudden, as I'm leaning back, this bar starts appearing over my head, straight above me. And it starts rotating around, and I'm looking, I guess it was like the back end of this thing. And it started like a bright light. I could see it starts getting longer and longer, and what it was rotating around.
All right, Kent, we're going to have to interrupt you. We're going to have to interrupt you here because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. So we'll continue this conversation when we come back on Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, lightning bolt from the other side, I swear. Always gets me, wow, I've been struck in the butt so many times by that lightning bolt, I don't know what to do, I swear.
Well, why don't we, Tim? Why don't we let Kent finish his story, and then we'll bring Lindsay in. I think Kent, where you left off, you said that you saw like a bar of light suddenly appear over.
Yeah, if anybody, to all the UFO people out there that have seen the documentary in the Illinois sighting by the policeman in 2000, the back of this thing looked very similar, almost identical to that type of craft. It was just a rectangular bar, and this thing took off behind my house and was headed south. And I jumped in my car and was chasing this thing and went to an area where there's a lake in our community, and I could see this thing, and it was just zipping off in the direction of the nuclear power plant. It's about 20 miles south of my house, but that sighting and one in the 70s in Lumberton had a flap going on, and We talk about synchronicity.
Were you involved in that Flap Lumberton? I remember the ham radio operators were receiving all kinds of weird messages from some robot or something.
What happened was I was watching TV and saw where these UFOs were coming down, so I decided, I'm going to jump in my car and go down there. And this was in April of 1975. And here's a synchronicity. It's unbelievable. I have this sighting where I'm driving down the highway down there. It was right outside of Red Springs, and around Lumberton, and I kept driving around and never been down there. So I'm just driving out in the country, driving on these roads, and I see the sheriff's car, and I believe it was another car, pull off to the side of the road, and there were guys standing out in the field, and I looked up, and there was this like a glowing red flat object over the trees, and it was going away, moving away. I got out of my car and looked at it and saw it was moving away, so I jumped back in my car, start chasing this thing. Well, when I had my conference in 2013, Leslie Kane, who I had as one of my speakers, asked me if I would do an interview with Lee Spiegel. So I get on and start interviewing with Lee Spiegel, and I start telling them about this.
That's where my info came from on the Lumberton. I was in contact with him back in those days, yeah.
Yeah, well, I sit there and I'm like, Lee starts interviewing me. He asked me about, how my interest and everything. So I started explaining my past. And when I got to the Lumberton sighting, he goes, Kent, he stops the interview. He goes, do you know who I am? I'm like, yeah, you're Lee Spiegel with the Huffington Post. And he goes, do you remember the UN hearings and had Jalen Hynek and everybody there? I said, yeah. I said, as a matter of fact, I got a copy of that picture. And he goes, well, that's me, the Serpico looking guy. He said, I organized that. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He goes, Kent, I'm going to tell you something. He goes, the guys standing out in the field in Lumberton? He goes, that was me. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He goes, no. He goes, I was in that field. He said, J. Allen Hynek had sent him down and asked him to investigate that case for him. So he went down there, and he was down through that whole deal. He was one of the investigators there, and he was the one out in the field with the sheriffs. And he goes, and you just missed it. I said, what do you mean? He goes, that craft had come over that field, sat right over top of them, and shined a big beam of light down on top of them. And then turned the light off and slowly rotated, and I caught the tail end of it when it was leaving. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. So Lee and I have hooked up a couple times, and he was searching for that Center for UFO studies that Hynek did on the Lumberton report, and I finally found a copy of it on the internet from France. It was in France, so I got a copy of it, made copies, and sent him a copy. But
well, I wrote a really long article about the Lumberton UFO incident. I think it was for Saga's UFO report magazine, because I remember I had a photo of I forget if it was a lady or a gentleman sitting there in front of their ham radio sets. They were getting these messages on almost a nightly basis. They were kind of synchronized. I mean, it was a robot because they kept repeating the same information or message over and over again. Very weird flap. Yeah.
It was sighted all over the place. It shined a light down and was beaming a big water tower down there. The sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, just so many people down there watching this thing. It was unbelievable. But those things, they just make an impact. Once you see something like that, it changes you. You realize something's going on that you're not being told. And this the synchronicity there. What happened is when I had this conference, as soon as I have this conference, and my wife, she'll tell you, I've told her back when I met her about my past, I said, if you're going to get to know me more, I've remarried. I remarried Patty, and it was, I said, if you want to get to know me, you got to know about my past, and if you're willing to accept that, and don't think I'm crazy.
It's not like you're America's Most Wanted or something.
Yeah, well, it's just like, this topic with jobs and relationships, it just doesn't work. I mean,
I'm interested because along with Kent this evening, we have his daughter on. Now, there are a few other. There's maybe a couple of families where, well, we got Paul and Ben Eno. who have been on the show, and they both share an interest. Their father and son. They both share an interest in the paranormal, and then we have the Woods. Isn't that right, Tim? The father and son who have done all the investigation on the MJ12.
Oh yes, yeah, right. Was it Ryan Wood and so?
Yeah, and Jim, I think Jim. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, okay.
And anyway, I don't know of any other father and daughter a team who have explored these subjects together. Lindsay, why don't you come in here and tell us a little bit about your background as far as the UFOs and the paranormal goes. Do you think your dad influenced on this? Some people might say maybe you were brainwashed into believing in this. Well, Lindsay.
Hello, Lindsay.
I think she's going to have to try hitting her microphone again.
Oh, yeah. I see this. Oh, okay.
Can you guys hear me now?
No, we hear you. Yes.
There we go. I don't know. My microphone just does not like me, I guess, at all. No, there's definitely no brainwashing whatsoever. That's for sure. That's for sure. It's something, the paranormal has just always been around since I've been a kid. I always tell people all the time that if that wasn't part of my life, that would absolutely be abnormal for me. So much has happened, but everything in terms of UFOs and aliens, it's definitely has surrounded my dad. So all my sightings and everything like that has always been when I'm around him.
Well, why don't you tell us about some of your experiences?
I think my first one was back in Hillsborough. Dad, how long ago was that?
Well, that was back in the first part, 1990s.
The 90s, yeah. So, yeah, that's the first one that I saw. I remember we were driving home. Dad had a truck, and it was back when it was still, safe and okay to ride in the bed of a truck. So my sister and I were in the back, and he parked the car, and my sister and I just jumped out. And as soon as we did, we just looked right up, and we're like, Dad, what is that? And there's this huge object in the sky. This is not just like a little... this was about the size of like a grapefruit, from what I can recall. Just this huge object just sitting in the sky. And Dad, getting into his mode of investigation, he just looks at us and he's like, okay, don't move. Don't take your eyes off it. I got to go grab my camera. And he runs inside to the house. And as soon as he gets right back outside with his camera, that thing is just gone. It just took off.
Boy.
I know.
It's almost like it's reading... the person's
read your
mind. Now, it's really weird because in some of these cases, we did a book, Tim and I, along with Sean Castile, other contributors, called The UFO Repeaters, The Camera Doesn't Lie. There are some people who seem to be like magnets when it comes to UFOs. We have a gentleman here in New York by the name of Mark Brinkerhoff who actually photographs these things floating by his New York City apartment building, and they're not birds, they're not clusters of balloons, they're UFOs of one type or another. Now the question is, does he attract them, or are they looking out for him in general? But we have a lot of people who we call UFO repeaters that seem to attract these things. Now, do you think either one of you could answer this, or both of you, that there's some reason that you have attracted these objects? Is there any sort of mental rapport going on?
Let me, if I could just talk a little bit more about what's happening. Maybe you can even get an idea, or maybe some thought process going on here. I held this major conference in 2013, and I didn't want it where they were selling, had alien dolls and vendors and everything. There were no vendors allowed. It was strictly scientific. I had Leslie Kane come down. I had Dr. Haynes, Dr. Westrom. I had Dr. Wendt. I had the head of JPON from France, Xavier Passot at the time. He came. Jose Ley from CEFA out of Chile came, representing their government. I had a General de Brouwer from Belgium. And I had all these top government officials and military and scientists. And so I held this conference, and one of the luxuries, and Colonel Halt was there, is one of the things we did was had a roundtable discussion, a private one, just with me and these gentlemen, to discuss what has occurred in my life. And Dr. Haynes and Dr. Western were basically helpful. And basically, everything that's occurred, I will tell you, you wrote a book on MIBs. You did a publication on MIBs.
A couple of them.
Yeah. And there's a picture in there that you displayed. I had an investigation. I went out with MUFON. It was a cattle mutilation and actually an abduction of cattle. And it was here in outside of Graham, North Carolina, outside of Burlington. And I investigated this case. The deputy sheriffs that I went to, they didn't have my name or nothing. I just said I'm with MUFON, and I was asked to come here. And they took me out to the site, and I videotaped this area. And there were branches broken in the woods where this cattle disappeared, and they were broken up. And I filmed this area. I couldn't get up because it was really high up in the air. And 2 days later, I'll tell you, like I told my wife and everybody, I've got this I've documented this, and it's on film. I had an MIB encounter that came to my office. I ran a property there in Hillsboro, and these three, and I'm going to tell you, one was, I would say he was a hybrid. I call him Shorty, and he was like the guy in your picture. As a matter of fact, it's almost identical looking. This guy came in, he was short, and he did the talking, but two guys came in. They were identical twins. They had to bend their heads over to get in the door. Everything I told my wife and everything I've documented on saying about what occurred in my office there with these things, and I call them things because they weren't human.
Well, this is really breaking news here. I mean, this is an exciting story.
And they came in to my office, and basically I knew right off the bat everything in this Niagara Falls film and story. If you've ever seen the MIB Niagara Falls, and they've got them on videotape where the security camera film of them entering the hotel there in Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
Right. If you listen to that story, that's everything I said, basically word for word, back in 2003. When I was telling my wife, and then I'm documented saying these things, I felt like they read my mind. I wanted to see their eyes, the big tall ones. I wanted to see their eyes. They had the sunglasses on. I couldn't move. I was frozen in my seat. I couldn't even swing around. One got behind me, but I kept focusing on this one by the door that stood there at the door and wanted to see his eyes. And I'm going to tell you something. It didn't even take, you couldn't even, millisecond. I mean, it was instantaneous. As soon as I thought, I want to see your eyes, this one, as he was standing up and so tall, and I'm in my seat, he bent his head down. As soon as I thought that, he bent his head down and looked straight at the floor, so I couldn't look up under his glasses. And I remember thinking, okay, it hit me right there. Okay, so you're reading my mind, you know? And then I started doing this rapport with this thing mentally and was very upset. I mean, I was irritated, and I just basically was yelling at this guy in my mind, and over and over and over. And the whole time, this little shorty's standing to my left, and he's yelling at me, but I really can't hear what he's saying. And finally, he spins me around my chair, and he looks down, and he rips his glasses off. And like, you want to see eyes? And he pulls his glasses off, but his eyes were like perfect silver dollars, larger than a silver dollar. And it just shocked me. I just remember sitting there and like almost in a state of shock. And they were the bluest eyes I've ever seen in my life. And it was just so strange.
Well, now, was there any verbal communication?
He sat there, and when I focused in on him, he was yelling. He goes, "You do not go back out there. Do you understand me?" And he was telling me not to go back out to this site. And I said, "Yeah, I hear you," like that. And he just spun around, and they left. And then I'm just sitting there, and I'm wanting to get out of my seat, and I couldn't move. And I wanted to go get their license plate, and I'm like stuck in my seat. And so I kind of turn at this point. As they start driving off, I can get up. I get up. I go out, and I can't read their license plate. They're too far away. I go back in my office, and my video camera, which was on the other side of the room in the kitchen area, I can see the compartments open, and the tape is gone. And I don't know how they even went over there, got over there, but now my tape was gone. I mean, luckily I had another investigator with me at the site at the time, that could verify that. But this occurred, and it really shook me up so bad, I stopped investigating from MUFON. I was the state section director.
Now,
I stopped investigating.
What were they dressed in? I mean, did they look like the typical Men in Black?
Suits, suits, the whole deal. The suits, their suits weren't black. They were like a real dark gray, but they had like the fedoras, the Frank Sinatra hats, the sunglasses, no hair whatsoever. Whoa. The two tall ones, I don't think their face was more than probably 4 inches wide. They were so skinny. And they weren't normal.
Have you had anybody do a drawing of this?
No, I haven't. What occurred is that when I got sick, I've got an incurable cancer. And at this point in my life, this is when my wife said, Kent, you really got to sit down. I want you to do one thing. I want you to have that conference you always wanted to have. I wanted to have a highly scientific conference where no laughing, no joking, no aliens.
I remember the conference and thinking it was rather upscale, maybe was the word that I was thinking.
Yeah, and this is all of them, even Dr. Haynes, all of them said they've never been to a conference like this ever. It was, as scientific as this was in the approach. And this is what I wanted to have. So my wife told me, Kent, you've got to do this. You've got to do this conference. You need to write a book, because I wanted my children to understand what my life has been like and what's going on. And so here's some synchronicity. The sighting I had when I was 9 years old, a year and a half after the conference in 2013, MUFON does an article. And it's an article of a kid that basically had an encounter with alien beings. This craft came down. It was in 1962, the same time as I had my sighting when I was 9, and it was a quarter of a mile from my house. And Norman Gagnon with MUFON Virginia is the one that did the article. So I called these guys. I'm like, my gosh, here it is. I got this documentation of everything I said happened when I was 9. Now, on MUFON post this, that you did this investigation. This occurred the same time in 62, and that's a quarter of a mile from my house in Falls Church. And so Norman and Tony and Ben Moss from MUFON Virginia, they all came down to my conference I had last October. And we sat and discussed, and they want to get together and really deeply investigate that some more. But that came out.
You have any of this, the lectures or anything up on YouTube?
No. I really, Tim, I really haven't. I've been working so hard on writing a book, and I really haven't really pushed it out there. And let me just share one other thing. At that conference, one of the visitors there was Randall Nickerson, who's doing that documentary on aerial phenomenon, the area school in Rahway, in Zimbabwe, back in the 90s, where all the school children, where the craft came down, the beings got out.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Randall happened to come to the conference, and he was there, and he actually came and stayed at my house, and he wanted to interview me for this documentary he was doing. And as he's sitting there talking, one of the things that some people have said, have you ever checked out Charles Hall? Because of these MIBs you're talking about, it kind of sound like tall whites. And you need to hook up with him and talk to him about it. And so I was talking to Randall after studying all Charles Hall and that whole area, Dogbone Lake, the whole deal. Randall says, listen, do you want to come and see something I filmed when I was out there? And I said, did you film this around Dogbone Lake? And he looked at me, he goes, are you with the government? I said, what? And he goes, what do you know about that area? I said, so I explained why, I knew this. He said, well, I got something I want to show you. So we went up to his hotel room, my wife and I, and we sat and watched this film that he filmed of this. It's basically like a glowing disc, and it's basically, you're looking like 20 miles away. And the screen is a distance of like 27 miles apart from one end to the other is what you're getting out of his viewfinder. And this object comes down and zips across, and just like a millisecond, it zips across, stops dead right over where Charles Hall said they, these beings in the underground base they've got, and it goes straight down into that mountain. And then all of a sudden it comes back up, and then all of a sudden another one comes up, and there's two of them, and they go up and down, and then they zip off again. And he goes, I showed this to Dr. Haynes, and his face turned all red, and his statement was, why are they doing that there? And he said, it confused me, his statement. So I'm sitting there, and I watched this thing. My wife sat there and watched it. And then the very next year, here MUFON comes out with another article where this pilot flying from St. Louis to San Francisco gets diverted as he gets close to Area 51. He's diverted north. And they told him there's going to be incoming traffic, divert north. Well, as he diverts north, he looks out his cockpit window and he sees this hologram come up where Area 51 is, and it's 5 miles high. And it's diamond shaped, a lavender color, like a diamond. And then there's a light blue crosshair in the middle of this diamond. And this is 5 miles high and a mile wide. And he said, all of a sudden, here's all these little bright discs coming down, and there's like 20 to 30 of them. And one by one, they're zipping down and going right through that crosshair. It's like they were all going in for a landing. And I sat there, and when I saw this article, I told Patty, I said, Patty, would you look at this article? I said, isn't this kind of describing exactly what we saw, Randall film?
All right, Kent, we're gonna have to interrupt you here.
Okay,
Kent.
all right. Yep.
Time to go to our break. So when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Kent and Lindsay Center on exploring the bizarre. So please stay tuned for more.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking with Kent Center and his daughter Lindsay Center. And Lindsay, I wanted to bring you into the conversation here. I wanted to ask you about, now as you were growing up with your dad and the influence that he had concerning UFOs and the like. I mean, were you interested? Right as like you were a kid. I know I have an 11-year-old daughter that she's not interested at all. I don't try to push, anything on her. If she asks a question, I'll answer it. But, right now she could care less. I mean, at that age, were you like that, or were you like, Dad, what's this? Look at that, just all over the place with it?
I don't remember asking too many questions, but he definitely told me a lot of stories all the time. And I do remember when I was younger, all of the field investigative work that he would do, he would have to go out and film everything. And I remember being young and we would put those videos on to sit there and watch it like it was just a normal everyday thing to see that kind of stuff. But if I had questions, I would always ask him, but he never pushed anything onto us at all. He was really good about it.
Well, okay. Now, what about talking about this with your friends when you were younger? I mean, did you make any attempts to do that, or were you like me when I was you know? Right, I just stopped. You know, I just it would just been like trying to talk to a brick wall, as you well know.
Yeah, I learned pretty quickly about who I could talk to and who I couldn't. That's for sure. I would definitely get a lot of looks like you were crazy or your family's really strange and whatnot. So I did for a while, just not really say anything to a lot of people. But as I did get older, I mean, it started becoming more and more easy. It was easier to talk to about.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, I wonder if it's more acceptable today out there in the
for sure
in so-called the middle America. You know, because of ancient astronauts TV shows and UFO hunters and
Well, if I could add that, I actually was asked to come and speak at a high school and speak to 3 different high school classes, and I was shocked at the amount they didn't know. There was half the class didn't even know what flying saucers meant.
Wow.
And we're talking one of these classes was an AP class. I was so shocked at what they didn't know, just in history. It was so depressing to me. And my wife,
I don't
her.
think unless I think you have a background in the subject, I don't think people delve into this.
No, I think kids much. Nowadays they're losing history. They're losing track of what's occurred and what's going on.
But there's a lot of kids now that still know quite a bit about it. I have people coming up to me. They're like 15 to 20 years old. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, you believe in that?" I'm like, "Of course." Then I'll start going off like with these stories. But I think it really just depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, if I could add, your question there kind of reminded me. As I was growing up, I didn't talk to no one. And here's another little bit of synchronicity. A friend of mine that I grew up with. He lived on the street behind us in Falls Church, and he became a policeman here in North Carolina. Actually, he lives in the same town I live in right now. He does videography on the side and films, and he worked his entire career on the police force, and he became a detective, the whole deal. And I never said anything about what I saw growing up. So my wife said, before I had this conference, she goes, "Why don't you call, I'll tell you his name is Wayne." She goes, "Why don't you call Wayne? And he's going to do some filming at the conference." He goes, "Maybe his police background, he can help you, because I wanted to go find out if there were any other deputy sheriffs or anything with that MIB encounter. Yes. If they had anything." And he goes, "Maybe he can help you some direction." I'm like, "Patty, I don't want to tell this cop about UFOs and, what all this stuff growing up." And I never even said anything to him. And so I had him come over, and she said, "Well, just ask him to give you a hand." So I sat there, and Patty's sitting right there, and he came over, and I said, "Wayne, listen, I got something to tell you, and I need your help." And I said, "Listen, ever since I was young, I've been interested in UFOs." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You remember that big rectangle UFO when we were sleeping on the porch? And we came out and there was that big rectangle UFO that we saw?" And I don't remember that. I don't remember a rectangular UFO. Back then, I never even heard of such a thing. But all I remember was this disc with the glowing light. But I was slept out there by myself on that night. And I have no clue, even to this day. My wife, her mouth just opened up and her jaw just dropped wide open. She was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Wayne, I don't know what you're talking about." He goes, "Kent, there was a big rectangular craft that just set up over the backyard." He goes, "Don't you remember seeing that?" And to this day, I don't remember that. But that floored me, But one last thing I want to add, and we'll let Lindsay go to town here, is when I had this conference, I kept getting these calls in 2013 from this old gentleman. It sounded like he could hardly breathe, but he kept asking me. He couldn't get to the conference and wanted me to come see him. He had something to tell me. And, I'm like, okay, I get a ton of calls. And I'm like, okay. He called me like 10 times. And actually, after the conference was over and I had the DVDs made and I was just so busy, I forgot all about it. Well, that was last October. All of a sudden, the manager of the hotel where we're having the conference, she comes in, she goes, I got a message for you. This guy wants you to call him. And when I saw the name, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the guy that called me back in 2013. I never returned his call. Mm-hmm. And he's at it again, So I called him and he said, listen, you've got to come and see me. He goes, I worked outside of Las Vegas back in the 40s and 50s, and I want to talk to you about something. I'm like, okay. And so I made a time and appointment, and then I got to thinking, Las Vegas, what did this guy do back in the 50s? Because it really wasn't that big back then. So I called him back and I said, look, before I come, I want to bring a friend and like to record a conversation if you don't mind. He goes, no, I don't mind. He goes, I said, well, where did you work? He goes, I worked for the FBI. And I said, okay, well, I'll be there. So my wife and Wayne actually went with us, and the three of us went to see this guy. And he proceeds to tell me the story that his best friend, his name is Howard Richardson, and his best friend, Lee Andrus, were both FBI agents. And he apparently lived outside of Vegas, and Lee lived in Vegas. So Lee asked him to come spend the night. They were going to go downtown. And so Howard went to go visit his friend. And when he got there, his friend was coming out the door, said, listen, I got a call. I've got to go. Do you want to ride with me? And whether this is true or not, Lee said, no, I want to stay here, and I'll wait for you to come back. But the way this guy was, his anxiety, I'm just wondering if he went with the guy. But anyhow, he said the guy returned late that night, all shook up, that he got out and was driving out on a highway outside of Las Vegas, and one of these disc-shaped crafts had landed, and there were beings out running all around this thing. And he sat and watched it for hours, and he was so shook up and disheveled. And the next day, Howard tried to talk to him about it, and he would not open his mouth, and he told Lee not to ever talk about it again. But the way, you have to understand, this guy, the way he's telling me and how much it bothered him, and this guy even called me for years, but this has bothered this man all his life. Well, as we're talking and I'm interviewing him, he passes out. He just falls asleep. He's in his 90s, and I said, look, we'll just come back and see him. So as we're leaving, I said, look, we'll come back, and I said, I want you to get the dates down if you can. Remember TV shows that are on or anything we'll bring back when this happened, when this occurred, the whole deal. I said, I'll come back and see you. So I called him back a couple of weeks later and called. He wouldn't answer the phone. And all of a sudden my wife says, I hate to say this, pull up the Greensboro paper and see if he's in the obituaries. And I pull it up, and darn if the guy didn't pass away. And so I'm looking at his obituary, and this guy ended up being head of all the special agents out of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's main office in D.C., out of the headquarters. And so he was no kook.
That's you've got a hold there of a lot of very interesting cases. One would look forward to seeing you put this down on paper and discuss this.
We're working on it.
You certainly have gotten in on a lot of weird UFO activity. So now, Lindsay, you mentioned that you're talking to people between the ages of 15 and 20 years old. Do you see that there's an attitude change among younger people as far as this is concerned, or they
Definitely.
They have more than just a vague interest in it?
Yeah, definitely. As soon as people kind of figure out what I do now in terms of the paranormal field and all that kind of stuff, and then they start asking questions because they're actually curious about it. They don't. Compared to when I was younger, any mention of this kind of a thing, people would kind of.
Are you in your 20s?
No, I'm in my 30s.
Oh, 30s. Okay. I just wondered. And you do some acting as well?
No acting. No? If you put a camera in front of my face, I would freeze like a deer in headlights.
Oh my goodness! Well, all right. I don't know where I got that idea. I thought I saw something your website. So, and now what do you you're into other than just UFOs though?
Yes, definitely. It goes spirits and negative entities, like anything paranormal. I'm definitely fascinated by, because it's just that curious part of me.
What have you had ghostly encounters or exercise of poltergeists or?
No, I've never exercised anything. That's definitely out of my league. But definitely have had encounters. Growing up, places I lived were haunted, so to speak. Things would move, or you get the phantom smells, or you see apparitions, or you would hear things too, either people talking or things moving on their own, or but yeah, even still to this day, there's still activity that happens. It's absolutely normal. I also go out and investigate as well whenever I have to go and help out at events and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I've had lots of experience, I would say, compared to
what can you tell us about one of your most intriguing ghostly encounters or paranormal experiences?
Where do I start? Let's see. I've just recently I was at the Anderson Hotel in Kentucky. There was an event for Weird Weekends that was there. They did some investigating, and that place is actually pretty cool. Definitely saw something in one of the hallways moving, and other people would catch EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, on the recorders of things that are in the room talking. But of course, you can't really hear it too well with your ear. Stuff like that, it happens anywhere I go and investigate. I've been scratched before. I've definitely been touched or poked, and I mean, you kind of name it, I've kind of gone through it or experienced it. So it's all fascinating to me. I wouldn't know where to start with. What would stick out the most?
Well, how about your first paranormal experiences? Or is there one going back to when you were growing up?
It's hard to pinpoint, because yet again, like, I kind of just grew up with this, so it's just always been around and normal. So I do remember as a child, like after, I think it was around the time that my great-grandfather passed away, that's when some activity picked up in our home. Mm-hmm. And it being just women in the house. It was just my mother and my sister and I. We would come home and we would always smell my great-grandfather's cologne, but we didn't have any of his in the house. Or we would think that, walking into a room, my mother would sometimes see him in our bedroom. The music box would play, lights would cut on. I would always hear walking in the hallway, just all kinds of stuff. So it's hard to say, like, what was the very first thing, because it all just kind of runs in together.
I think we had a lady, Tim, remember, on the show. I think she was from North or South Carolina, where she said she knew when Grandma was around. Now, they came from a pretty strict religious Baptist family, so they didn't believe in this, but they could smell Grandma's apple pie.
That's right. I remember that.
I want a slice. Never mind just smelling it.
Yeah, sometimes you can get smells as a way of something trying to communicate that it's there, or just as a way
grandfather's cigar I'm not so wild about, but Grandma's apple pie is okay. Well, now, do you see any connection between the paranormal and UFOs?
A lot of times there will be activity from people having sightings or experiences with beings, and then there being paranormal activity pickup in terms of people will start thinking that they see spirits or ghosts or things moving, like poltergeist activity, things are moving on their own. And it's usually there is a connection there. I personally don't know exactly what it is as of right now, but I've definitely noticed that trend going, that stuff does pick up.
Have you ever tried to discuss that with anybody who's really heavy into the whole ghost hunting thing? Because I mean, as Beckley and I know, a lot of times you'll just again you'll hit that dead silence because it's like ghost hunters be like, "What? Do you believe in that UFO stuff? Come on!"
I know anybody when it comes to paranormal with ghosts and spirits and stuff, they are just as fascinated when it comes to aliens and UFOs and beings and things. So, no, there are plenty of people I'm lucky to have the privilege to that I can talk to whenever I feel like it. And yeah, it's fascinating what they think and stuff. So we definitely are starting to see a lot of connections.
That's nice to hear. Why don't you tell us a little bit about center stage events?
Oh, yeah. So I have a talent event and management company for, as of right now, it's specifically geared towards the paranormal field. So a lot of people that many might see on TV, especially like ghost hunters with like Grant Wilson and Adam Berry, Amy Bruni, KJ McCormick, Destin Pari. I manage all of them. They're on my roster, but there's also people like John Tenney and Greg and Dana Newkirk and Chip Coffey, he's a psychic medium. Chris Fleming. There's a lot.
So you booked them for like lectures and events?
Yes. So pretty much anybody that has an event and they would like to have them come out and make an appearance or partake in an investigation or anything like that, they can definitely reach out to me and I can pretty much try to make it happen for them.
Oh, wonderful! That's a. Well, we used to have in the old days like lecture bureaus and supply like colleges and high schools and libraries were a big. They still are to some degree. Places where the libraries they had more money in those days. They had a set budget, and they would bring in a speaker on some a particular topic that was. Either of interest or not of interest. I remember giving a couple of talks and there were as few as 3 people, but then on the other hand, one or two talks where there was 120 in the audience. That was the library circuit, Yeah. And of course, I used to put on UFO conferences around the country. I wouldn't say that I was the first, but no, you couldn't say that because George Van Tassel. Out there at Giant Rock Airport, if you're familiar with him, he had the granddaddy of all the UFO events. He would get up to 10,000 people, for a weekend, and that would be under the blistering hot, sun of Joshua Tree in the Mojave Desert. So, God bless him. I don't know, how people did that. I remember going out to the Joshua Tree for the first time. And it must have been 100 degrees, and everybody was carrying umbrellas and wearing long sleeve shirts. I don't know how they quite managed that, but I guess you have a different attitude if you live in the desert. Not one of my. Well, I like to visit there. You certainly cannot get a panoramic view of the sky like you can out there. Part of the country. Well, now. You've lived in North Carolina, Kent, all your life, or pretty much all your life?
Well, we moved when I was almost 5 years old up to D.C., and I lived in D.C. all the way through my senior year in high school, and then I moved back down to North Carolina.
You're in somewhat of a rural setting?
Yeah, it's a right outside of Burlington, North Carolina. And
have you been down to the Brown Mountain Lights?
Yeah, I've been down there. Didn't see anything when I went in one trip. In the Asheville area, we went down to caught. As a matter of fact, even Lindsay came down with me. We all caught the big eclipse. Went down to the western part of North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, I was down to the Brown Mountain area. Back in the mid-1960s, so some of the original witnesses, like the Roses and all, they were still alive, and we even had a fellow there who had the Outer Space Museum. His name was Ralph Lale, and we've written about him and talked about it on the air. He was an old buck, I don't know, up there in his, I guess, late 70s or early 80s, and he sold, beef jerky and Diet Coke, and behind the counter he had a mummified being in a coffin that he said was we never could figure out exactly what he claimed it was. So it was like what we call a roadside attraction, which are not too big anymore. But you got a mermaid that one day and he's an alien the next, and a little dwarf or something like. Anyway, he had an alien in a coffin, and then he had some really giant crystals. He claimed that he had been inside the mountain and had regular contact with the people from the planet Pooh or wherever they were from. His was a rather strange story, but he was he had his roadside attraction, the Outer Space Museum, and he put out a little booklet, which I probably have reprinted from, and maybe even have a copy still here. I was called the Brown Mountain Lights, and he was a character. I mean, in those days, you tended to find more characters, I think, than today. But do you think that, I mean, the reason that you've had these UFO incidents is because there is a clearer view of the heavens? I mean, does that have anything to do with it, do you think?
Well, we're gonna have to leave this on a cliffhanger, Tim, because unfortunately we are coming up on our bottom of the hour break. But remember that, because we'll take this up again when we come back in just a few moments on Exploring the Bizarre.
Always my question.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre, with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Once again, Tim, here we are at the bottom hour of our show, half hour to go, and we have so many more questions that we'd like to ask.
This has been a humdinger of a program.
It really has. Now, and unfortunately,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I was just going to say that I had to interrupt you when we had to go to our last break. You had a question for Kent, so by all means, continue that process.
Oh, let me see now. The question, okay. The question was it? Let's see. Was it more than two syllables?
It was about George Fawcett and my past, and basically.
Yes, and in cases you might have investigated that were intriguing. Or,
I had just so many numerous cases that just were basically things you could explain away. Nothing that really stood out like the cattle case I had. Sharing. I shared so much with George. He was the only one I ever felt comfortable in my life talking to about things that went on in my life, other than the little roundtable discussion I had with Dr. Haynes and Colonel Halt and everything. And one of the main things I wanted to get out of Colonel Halt, based on what he saw at Randlesham and what I saw, how it impacted me. And I wanted to know how he felt. I mean, did it make a difference in his life when he saw something like that? And he basically had that military attitude, just matter of fact.
He's kept it pretty close to the vest, and seems to be like to stir up a little bit of the of trouble there among the other witnesses. Now there's actually there's actually a new book out on the Rendlesham Forest that Flying Disc Press, which is Phil Mantle's company over there in England, has just brought out. I haven't read it yet, but it looks like it's a kind of an independent investigation of the case, which is probably important, because what we have for the most part are individual sides of the story. Take it my way, take it that way. This happened, this didn't happen. I was there, I wasn't there. You kind of after, since 1980, you've got a lot of contradictions, which you actually would expect, because I don't know how many witnesses were there. We hear 40, 50, maybe more, but they were spread out on 3 different nights, and in a variety of locations. And of course, we hear mainly from the military, the people that were in the military. They're at the Bentwaters, but there were also civilians, involved. The people who lived in the area and in the town, and so forth. And they seem to have been forgotten about for the most part. Although I think the initial investigation by Dottie Street, who's a friend on Facebook, after all these years, maybe had interviewed some of those original witnesses who lived in the countryside there, and not so much the military. But now, I of course, like I say, I corresponded with George Fawcett, and he would send me his update, and he'd have them reprinted in Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine, in that book that I did inside the saucers going back as far as 1964. Did he ever have a UFO sighting himself?
Yes, he had a UFO sighting when he was in college, and the things that we shared with each other after the MIB incident I had, he shared with me. He was in Chicago giving a talk, and he said that when he walked outside, there was one waiting for him, asked him to get in the car. And he sat in the car, and the guy was telling him, "Don't you talk about this stuff no more." And he goes, "We know everything about you, and we don't want you speaking about this topic." And he just kind of blew him off. But when he got home from Chicago, his daughter had called him, and she apparently was in college, and somehow an MIB came in her dorm room, and she called her dad because she was really upset because this being found out what college she was at, the dorm she was staying in. He got into her dorm room and was warning her to tell her dad to stop talking about this stuff. And he was sharing this with me, and he was like, and things I really don't want to discuss, but these things aren't, like I said, the ones I saw, the two of them.
What do you make of these men in black? Who in the hell are they?
I don't know, but I can tell you that the two tall ones were definitely not human. I mean, they were definitely not human. The shorty, just because it was, I want to say he was a hybrid, maybe. He looked more like a person, just like in your picture. He looked more like a person, but when he took his glasses off, those weren't normal eyes. And it just, everything that occurred during that time. In my roundtable discussion with Dr. Haynes and Dr. Westrom and everything, and I really went into detail about things that have occurred in my life. And I found out through Dr. Haynes, as he was sitting there talking back and forth with Westrom, Dr. Haynes was more involved in just the sightings and more than pilots' reports. And he told me I was the 44th person that actually, when I was flashing my flashlight, had some type of communication interaction going on.
Yeah.
Dr. Westrom said, from your stories, you're falling straight in line with actual cases we've dealt with. And he said, there are people that, much like Travis Walton, that accidentally came up on something, and, even Travis feels that he got too close and he got hurt by this craft. And that's why they took him, to kept him alive, to revive him and, help him. But it wasn't supposed to happen. And he goes, and there's ones that are chosen. And he goes, and Dr. Westrom said, Kent, he goes, for some reason, you've been chosen. And he goes, we don't know what the reason is. He can tell you, but all the cases that I study, you have been chosen. And he got up and came over to me, and he gave me a big hug. And he goes, and it's okay. He said, trust me. He said, you're not alone. And it kind of reassured me in my life that all these things, it's the point where are you crazy? What the hell is going on? And what is all these things that is happening and occurring, this synchronicity and all this, it's just like, what in the world? And it's just for some reason, it's for a reason. I don't know what it is. I still, to this day, it's like my friend Wayne and the rectangular craft. There are things that I don't remember that other people witnessed. And it just, for some reason, these things are around me, and I'm not talking like I can go outside and see them and it's happened every day, but we're talking maybe 15 times in my whole life.
Uh-huh.
But
Well, you got to
these are
start
major
carrying.
deals.
You got to start carrying a cell phone with a good camera on it. I mean,
Yeah, I have a video camera. I've got actually three of them that I keep.
Yeah. Well, a lot of
I got three of them that I keep on me.
Wasn't
I've
it
got
just
night vision goggles.
What's that, Lindsay?
Wasn't it just last year, Dad, that you even had an incident happen near the mountains?
Well,
even
yeah, I was
having a cell
coming
phone
back through Asheville.
Anything.
It was coming back through Asheville, and it was kind of a drizzly night, and I could just see up in the clouds something bright was just flying like over my car as I was on Interstate 40. And it was right down by Old Fort area on I-40. And I was heading back towards Burlington. And it was pitch black and no cars there. I was like 2 a.m, and my car just died. It just died on the middle of the interstate. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, somebody's going to hit me. And my lights cut off, everything cut off. And I turned the key, couldn't get it on, pulled my lights back off and on. Nothing. I had nothing. And I got out of the car, pulled the hood, and I was shaking the battery cables, just trying to figure out what the heck's going on. I got back in the car. I just sat there, and all of a sudden the car just starts back up. And then when I get home, even my cell phone, the time on my clock, it disappeared on the car because it's like the whole thing died. So it basically back to zeros. But when I got home, I noticed that even my cell phone was like 35 minutes, off time. Yeah. It was just 35 minutes off on my cell phone. I'm like, what in the world? And my wife, Patty, when I walked in the door, she was expecting me a little earlier, and she said, did you have traffic or what? She goes, I'm like, no. And I told her what happened. And I said, I even tried calling her, and my cell phone wouldn't work. And I looked at my phone, and it's 35 minutes off. And I went, oh my gosh, look at that, and showed it to her.
We've got quite a few cases where there's a time displacement. In fact, in this a case in England, we call it the Thing, the Warminster flap that went on for probably more than a decade. Yeah. The place where I had this UFO flashed the light at the UFO, and it seemed to maneuver, when I blinked at it with my torchlight. But there were all sorts of time displacements there, where on the same evening, numerous people in the town, their watches were slowed down an hour or whatever. I mean, it just, time seems to play an important part in this, or maybe our concept of time is just totally wrong. Perhaps UFOs are here to tell us that there's a difference in our entire what's the word I'm looking for here? Our entire concept of the cosmos and the universe. So now, do you have a summation on all of this? I mean, are we being visited by being some other planet? Is this a part physical?
I have pretty much. It's not a good feeling, and I don't really push this. I didn't really talk to my kids or anything about, but I just sense that something is going to happen. I think the government knows what's going to happen. I do think there's so many reports of this interdimensional, where airline pilots crap just appear out of nowhere. I think there's like the children at Ruwa School in Zimbabwe, and the messages they receive in their heads. I just think that the government knows basically what the future is going to bring. And I think these beings are here to help. I think they're here to save parts. I know you see a lot of these landings where they're getting plants, and it's like they're trying to save some of the plant life, and God knows what else. But there's so many. You're in a rabbit hole. There's just so many different roads this branches out to.
Absolutely. UFOs are it's like a giant maze. Well, we are pulling up here towards the end of the show, and I did want to give you the opportunity to tell our listeners where they might obtain more information and the videos that you have.
Well, if they want to just go on Facebook, I did have a website, but it just cost too much. But my Facebook site is the Center for UFO Research N.C. You can pull it up. You can send me a message. I have the DVDs. Just pay the postage or whatever, and I'll ship these out to you. No charge for the DVD. It was a great conference, a scientific conference. A lot of big names that I had come down.
Well, you did another one later on.
Well, what happened was one of the things, the books I really liked the most was Timothy Good's Above Top Secret. Had a lot of good information in that. I met Timothy. As a matter of fact, the night I received a call to go out in this cattle mutilation, I was at Timothy Good's talk he was giving in Raleigh. And so when I wanted to find the date and everything, because I didn't even have the date, I couldn't remember when the date was, I contacted Timothy. He said, "Do you remember speaking in Raleigh?" He gave me the exact date of when that occurred. So that was helpful information. But he was the first one I asked to come to this conference. So I bought his plane ticket from England and had everything set. And then when I got Leslie involved and all these speakers, there was an uproar that some of them wouldn't come because Timothy was going to be there. They didn't want to discuss aliens. And as a matter of fact, the DVDs, I have two of them. I have the whole what's called the Scholars Collection, but I didn't want to censure Timothy Good, so I had to do a separate DVD of Timothy's talk. Because the others wouldn't want to be on there if I had Tim on there.
Boy.
So,
what nitpicking?
It's just politics and the taboo and the whole deal. Yeah. It was really frustrating, but so it's like
he's got some pretty. He's got, he believes in George Adamski, and I'm sure that most of the other speakers don't buy the contactees' stories. But, I knew most of the contactees either through correspondence or meeting up with them. They were a little bit of yang and a little bit of chang, They had some, and then they would add to the story because they liked the limelight, and nobody made any money off of this. They would say, they traveled around the country. They went on the Greyhound bus. You
don't make money in this stuff. I'm telling you.
I've been doing. If anybody is a professional ufologist, I guess I would be. And in the book publishing business, for a few years there, people were just there were bookstores. There were like 4,000 bookstores around the country that catered to the I call them an alternative. It wasn't just UFOs, but yoga and health food and stuff like that. Now there are no bookstores that cater to anything outside of a Barnes & Noble, and you're not going to get, people say, but look, they got a whole stack of books in there. Well, what people don't realize is that Barnes & Noble takes the book on consignment. So they may have 40 copies of your book out there. You get paid for what you sell. Maybe you're going to sell 5 copies, and you got to pay the shipping both ways. So, unless you got a couple of really hot authors or something. Well, I notice even the books now, they print them on cheap paper. They're printing them on newsprint because they're putting out 40 or 50,000 copies and probably selling a third of them, and that's their break even. It's like the old magazine business when we used to do UFO Universe and all these other magazines. Your break even was rather low, but you got to keep your overhead down to a minimum. But at least we did pay for articles there. And nowadays it's kind of hit or miss. You post everything.
My thing is just getting as much of the truth out and that's occurred in the past as possible, just for knowledge.
Well, that's the important thing. I think that's pretty much what we've gotten down to. We got a few books. We just published a book by Reverend Barry Downing, who did a book back 50. He did a book 50 years ago. It was probably the original book on the UFOs in the Bible.
In the Bible.
And it came out the same year as Chariots of the Gods, and it caused quite a controversy. Well, he was on the show recently, and it turned out that he had a second manuscript that he wrote up. It was never published. So I said, I haven't published a book by an outside author in a while, but if you want, it's already there in PDF form. Let me give it a shot. And it's not selling the thousands of copies it would have if it were done 20 years ago. But it's in today's age of Amazon, where you got 17,000 other
no kidding.
authors, it's doing a few other things. And we're trying to get. I don't know. Do you remember the story of Carl Higdon? The Wyoming hunter that had the experience that I always thought was one of the top cases. Well, I thought he had passed away. Well, it turns out I talked to his wife. They got two books that they've been working on, and he's sitting there, and they're probably going to publish it themselves. His health has not been all that great, but they actually did a show a couple of weeks ago, and I heard it, and I said, geez, I knew this guy back in the 1970s and got in touch with him, So, okay, well, we're let me see here. We've got.
Have you heard of Scott and Suzanne Ramsey? Did the Aztec books? They're
we've had them on the show too. Yeah.
They're a great couple.
Yeah. We've really we've knocked this subject around now. Tim, how many shows we done?
I don't know, 4 or 5, I think. Yeah.
No, I think Peter, who keeps track of these things, said this would be maybe 113.
Something like that.
Yeah, something. And then of course we did other shows before that, and I've been doing this for 50 years. So I don't know. I must have done 1,000 shows. I bet. Yeah.
Oh man, how about that?
And I'm still not talked out. But
there you go.
Lindsay, how can people find you and find out your activities and maybe book a speaker or a ghost hunter or a paranormal type?
Oh, we've got Tom Reed on there as well on my roster. He's pretty well known in the UFO field, but you can definitely find my information at www.centerstage.com. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all social media. A really good event that's actually coming up in March, 23rd and 24th, is going to be with Grant Wilson and Chad Lindbergh for the Lost Limbs Foundation. We're going to be doing an investigation at the Rhodes Hotel in Atlanta, Indiana. So that one's actually going to be, it's for a really good cause. Lost Limbs Foundation, if anybody hasn't heard of it, it's a great charity. They help provide financial assistance to families in need, whose family members are in need of prosthetic limbs. So a lot of the proceeds went to that cause. So it's going to be a great event. So if anybody
that's Center Stage with an S.
Yeah.
Center S-E-N-T.
Play on words, the last name, yes.
So what is your most haunted hotel, would you say? I mean, it seems like every hotel's got a ghost in it now.
Well, if you think about how many people have been on this planet and how much space there isn't really one square mile that doesn't have some sort of activity. I think that everywhere on some level is haunted.
You liked the Queen Mary, though, didn't you?
Yeah, the Queen Mary was absolutely amazing. Of course, it's definitely a hotel, still in a ship. But Mount Washington is by far, I think one of the most beautiful places I've seen.
You've got to go to Jerome, Arizona. Jerome has got more ghosts there than they do people. Actually, the town consists of like 444 people.
Wow!
But the ghosts are amazing. The town is.
Take a note of it.
I'll send you a copy of the book that I wrote. It has a whole chapter in there. It's one of the most amazing. There's a ghost hunter on every corner.
Interesting.
And it's an old Western town full of prospectors and drunks and bordellos and really like weird stuff. But we're here, Tim. The big pumpkin is coming to crush us once again.
Well, we got probably a little less than 2 minutes left in the show, and let's see.
The big turkey. You're right.
The big turkey. That's right.
Turkey. Yeah. But pumpkin pie. So it all does go together. We are in the holiday festive mood here on exploring the bizarre, and it's been a great show. I think we've learned Tim. We learned a lot tonight.
Oh, fantastic show! And I wish we had more time to talk to both Lindsay.
Well,
I have a bunch more questions, and I guess we're just going to have to wait till next time.
Well, I think we will have Kent back on, perhaps as a panelist on one of our shows. He's had so much experience in this, he can throw some of the questions at some of the other guests. I think
that'd be great.
Absolutely wonderful evening with a family. With the
thanks so much for having us,
guys, for having us.
All right, thank you all for being with us tonight, and wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, yes, indeed. Yeah, gobble gobble.
Good night, all.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on exploring the bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100, exploring the bizarre.